everyone to our annual briefing for the ULI Asia Pacific Awards program. I'm joined today by Dan Surf, who's one of the program jurors based in Singapore, and I'm based in Hong Kong. I manage the report for the ULI and put together all the back office administrative functions. So I'm going to give a fairly concise, I hope, rundown of the history of the awards, and then give some ideas about how best submissions can be framed so that they have a good chance of success. And then we'll be open for Q&A in the second half of this webinar, where Dan and I can discuss some of the issues that we commonly see in submissions that come in every year. And of course, anyone who's watching can fill in the chat with any questions that they may have. And then Dan and I, if necessary, will give you whatever answers are appropriate. So just to give a background to the awards program, this will be the 6th year in which we've held the Asia Pacific Awards program, although it's been in effect rather longer than that in the US. It's been quite a successful program during that time. We have something like between 50 and 70 submissions every year. And that goes on to give us maybe 20 or so finalists and perhaps between 10 and 15 winners on any given occasion. Although it should be said that there's no quota for either winners or for the finalists. Basically, submissions are judged on merit, and those that are deemed to be worthy by the jury will be granted whatever status they think is appropriate. So if your project is good enough, then it's going to go through no matter what the level of competition is in any given year. It should be said, I think, that there are many different awards programs, as probably most of you already know, around the world. Most of those tend to be more design focused. Our awards program is really looking in a more holistic way at all the different attributes of any given project. So it's rather different than other awards programs. It is, in our view, and I think generally within the market, regarded as one as, if not the most prestigious awards program globally. And so we tend to attract quite a large entry base as a result of that. Okay, Camille, next slide, please. So this slide just gives an outline of how the different awards programs are structured. There are programs in all of the 3 different global regions, so one in Americas, one in Europe, and one for the Asia Pac. Once these 3, we call them introductory submission programs are concluded, then the winners of that are automatically entered without any further ado or any further entry submissions or entry fees for that matter into our global Awards for Excellence program, which is sort of the best of our global submissions. And then they will compete to win a global award. I think last year there were 2 awards for the global program, 2 Asia Pac applications out of the, I think, 50 or so that were originally submitted. So it's quite a rarefied environment there, and only the very best ones will get through. Okay, can the next one? And this gives just an outline of our jury. We have 14 jury members, split up regionally between the different markets across the Asia Pacific. So you can see here where these are located. We still have a couple of new jury members to be appointed, one in Japan and one from the Philippines. So they will populate this slide later on. We split them up in this way so that firstly, it gives us obviously a geographical variety. And at the same time, once we get to the stage where the finalists are appointed, then we need to do site visits for the individual submissions that have reached that stage. And obviously, if our jury is distributed across the region, it's easier for them to visit the sites than it would be if we are more centrally organized. All right, can you next one, please? So at this point, we'll have a look at some of the winners from last year. We have 4 of them lined up, just to give you a taste of what types of projects do well, and what type of projects the jury is looking to award, and the characteristics that they might feature. And the first one here, as you can see, is an Australia-based program called Key Quarter, which involves, and is interesting for a couple of reasons, I think. It has two basic characteristics. One, this is an area-wide application. It's not involving an individual building. It does involve renovation of the larger building you see there, which is the old AMP Tower, now known as Key Quarter, I think, in Sydney. But it also a renovation and an adaptive reuse of this entire area, which is in downtown Sydney, right next, in fact, to the ferry docks and very close to Sydney Opera House. So quite a historic area. You can see the photos on the right involve the upgrading and repurposing of some of the old buildings, perhaps, I don't know exactly, but maybe 200 years old within the area. For retail purposes, I think there's some residential in there and quite a bit of public space as well. So it was quite sensitively recreated and renovated. But the cornerstone of the project in general is the larger building there, as you see it on the left-hand side. And this was interesting because it involved the repurposing of a tower that was, I think, built during the 1970s, and one that had become outdated, of course, over the years, relatively smaller than the purposes of the modern day facilities. But AMP, who owned the tower, had applied to the city council to knock it down and rebuild. And they had some, I think, resistance from the council on the basis that they didn't want the new building to be any higher than those that were already in the vicinity, which meant that it would be rather smaller, and therefore, less profitable for purposes of attracting new tenants. And so rather than knocking it down and starting it again, it was decided to use the core of the old building, the concrete core, as the foundation for repurposing or readapting the newer building. So they retained that original core concrete structure, and then around it created, as you can see, this array of angled components to the new structure, which from the interior are also very progressively designed in terms of the way in which the floor plates were used. They're very adaptable, so it was very easy to change them for purposes of different types of use, and also in terms of the size, so they could be small or large on demand. And there are also a lot of public spaces inside, a very light building, some atriums, also some staircases, which encourage people to actually walk from floor to floor rather than take the lift. So from that point of view, it was, from a design point of view, very progressive. Also, from an environmental point of view, it also ticks that box, because instead of knocking down the building, which involves quite a bit of embodied carbon and environmentally unfriendly for that reason, it retained that original structure and incorporated it into the new. And it's a great example of how buildings can be repurposed in an environmentally sensitive way and still have fairly spectacular design outcome. All right,
I can
next one,
add
please.
real quick, Colin. This
Sure.
is a good example for all the people on the call that, in looking at it from the Urban Land Institute and principles of the ULI, ways in which the new developments are creating not only interesting facades, building forms, and a variety of different other intrinsic benefits. The planning and the contribution of these developments, particularly this one and some of the others you'll probably see, go beyond just purely the built environment. There is an urban contribution to the urban fabric. There's a contribution to the not only just the flow of traffic, which is just an easier planning exercise. It's truly making a mark in the location and a real addition to the city. And that's to a great extent what we like to see at the jury level or in the awards altogether, is that the building makes that much more of a better city, if you will.
Right. Thanks, Dan. And we can go on to the next one then, please, Camille. All right, this is a Japanese-based project called Orandajima House, out, I think, somewhere in the provinces north of Tokyo.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's a great
near
example.
Fukushima.
Near Fukushima, okay, right. So
Yeah,
in fact, which I'll come into in a second, it's a great example of how projects don't need to be those that have been sponsored by, as was the case with Key Quarter, a big developer, and involve huge amounts of investment. This is really a relatively small, in fact, it was a very small project that was built on a shoestring, but because it did tick the boxes and involved various components that the ULI is looking for, it did win an award. And it is a great example of the fact that you don't need to be one of the big players in order to be successful. In fact, this was one of the global award winners, one of the two global winners from the Asia Pac that I mentioned before. So again, it was considered to be a very highly achieving project, irrespective of the fact that it's really quite small.
yeah. That's
Um,
also just a note again on the basis of what Colin just said. Um, Social projects have a little bit of an edge in terms of its ability to contribute to the community. And again, something else that even if commercial projects have a similar type of contribution, that it is a benefit to the submission. But in this case, it was it's very small. I can't impress upon you that the project is tiny, but the significance and the benefits it provides to the community, the sensitivity about where it's located, the elements of history, the elements of a bit of a shrine element to it, and obviously, as you can see that from the picture on the right, the community and engagement was what was alluring to the committee.
hmm. And just to give a bit of background to this, as Dan mentioned, this project is located near Fukushima, and it was built in response to the tsunami that devastated the local town and wiped out local buildings, the homes of a lot of local residents. And as a result, this building was created, as I say, on a very small budget, in order to provide some kind of refuge, I suppose, to try to address the trauma of the children from the local area, and provide them a place to hang out, if you like, during the time in which the town is being rebuilt. So it functions as a school and as a daycare center for mothers and young children, and I think there's also some capacity there for senior citizens as well. Quite sensitively designed inside, muted colors, natural fabrics that were used, lots of light in there as well. So it was, it was deemed to be, as Dan says, a great attribute to the local community in terms of how it was recovering from the problems and the destruction of the earthquake and the following tsunami. Okay, next one, please, Camille. Right, so this is a project in China, and it involves the restoration of a river course in Sichuan, which is a town, I can't remember exactly what province it is, but up in the north in China. And it is actually one that is typical of quite a few submissions that we've seen in China, where river courses have been renovated. I think if you go back 10, 15 years in China, there was extensive pollution. I think this has changed quite a lot, and this is an example of how things have changed in China, where factories would discharge effluent and pollutants into local river courses. In this case, there was a fairly small river that moved through this area. It was used in the way that I mentioned before for discharge of pollutants, and the local developer had, in this case, basically renovated the river to make it something that could be useful for the community. Not simply in terms of a local recreation, as you can see, it's used for boating, and it has a linear park on both sides, but also so that it can be a feature of the local residential community. As you can see also, there are houses on each side. So very sensitively done. And as I say, we've seen this type of project on a small or a large scale coming out of China, which are a great template, I think, for the types of river restoration projects that can be done either in China or elsewhere around the world in order to renovate or to restore river courses that have been depleted as a result of industrial purposes or otherwise. Really a fantastic example of what can be done. Okay, so Camille, next one, please. And finally, this is another project from China. It's just Xintiandi Plaza. It's in Shanghai. This is a retail project, and it's located very near Xintiandi, which I think many of you may know, famous reuse or restoration project in China, where an older area, housing and factory area in China was very sensitively restored. It lies between that and a larger commercial area, Huaihailu, and it serves as a connector, basically, between the old historical area of Xintiandi and the commercial area in between. It features, and again, it's an adaptive reuse. So there was a 1970s style retail center, or basically department store, I think, that was located on the same spot. And instead of knocking it down, it was again repurposed in a very sensitive way. Firstly, to act as a connector. So in that sense, it creates that connection between old and new. And then inside, it had a very progressive design template, so that it's, I think the idea was to try and replicate what was outside on the inside. So it had quite a lot of greenery inside. It also had a lot of features that echoed the Xintiandi thesis and the Xintiandi design concept within the interior, and very successfully so. So an example in this case of another commercial real estate application, and bringing design excellence together with a sensitivity to terms of place in the overall development, as well as an example of how existing buildings that had sort of outlasted their use and were no longer really relevant to the context of the local environment, and to upgrade them to something which is going to be very long lasting and a benefit to the community. All right, so I think that gives you a very brief outline of the types of awards or the types of features that the jury is looking for when it's assessing whether a project is likely to be eligible for an award. There are, in fact, a larger outline of all of the different awards winners from last year on our awards website. So if you go to the website and click the green margin on the left-hand side, you can have a look at all of the projects that won last year and from all of the previous years, where there's a write-up that gives details of what's special about them and why they won an award, if you want to go into more detail. Right, so let's see, next one, please, Camille. So let's have a look at this point about, very briefly, how to go about making a submission. If you go to our awards website, you can see here on the left-hand side, this is the current website. In order to make a submission, you simply need to click on the Apply Now button, and that will take you through to the next page, which, if you are a ULI member or your company is a ULI member, you simply log in, and then it will take you into your application form. If you're not a ULI member, then it will ask you to create an account, which isn't actually an invitation to join the ULI as such. You don't need to be a ULI member in order to apply for this program. It will just ask you for a few basic details so that it can populate the form. And then once you've done that, it will take you to your application form. And from there, you can go ahead and fill it out. I won't at this point go through the application form itself. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's also quite comprehensive. So you're not expected to fill that out in one go. You can fill out whatever parts of it you want and return to it as you want. At the bottom of the original web page that you're looking at again here on the left side of the screen, there are links to the submission form, which are in, I think, Japanese, Korean, and Mandarin. And it gives a translation of all the various questions. You can't fill in the form itself in any other language. I'm afraid the form has to be filled in English, but you can have a better idea of what the questions are from looking at those. And those are downloadable, so you can, take them onto your desktop. But the form does have to be filled in English, as I mentioned. Also at the bottom of the form are the submission guidelines, and the guidelines will give a fairly detailed account, an explanation of how to fill in the submissions form. Again, I don't want to get into that in too much detail, although certainly if you have questions, then please go ahead and ask those as we go, and certainly when we get onto the Q&A session, which will be coming up in a few minutes. Right, I think after that, yes, I think there's one other issue that we need to talk about at this point, and that is the PowerPoint. Probably the most important part of the submission, apart from the form itself, which obviously gives the jury the detail and the data it needs to begin their assessment. Probably the most important part of it is the PowerPoint, which basically is a way for submissions to tell their story in a graphical way. And PowerPoints, again, the granular details are set out in the guidelines, so I don't want to go into these in too much detail, but there are one or two issues, I think, which is useful for submitters to understand. So let me go through these in very briefly in a thumbnail form. Firstly, we would like the submission to be, the PowerPoint to be made as a PPT. Sometimes people want to convert them to a PDF and then send them in. Doesn't really work for us very well in practice when we go through them, because we want everyone to have their PowerPoints in the same format. Second thing, we don't want the PowerPoints to be too long. Sometimes people think that they go to town and they make very long submissions. It increases their chance of success. It doesn't really do that, given that if we have, say, 50 to 70 different submissions that the jury needs to go through, we only have a finite amount of time. So you might have 10 or 15 minutes maximum for any given submission. And if you make your submission, your PowerPoint 50 slides, then it doesn't allow the jury to look at any given page in the PowerPoint to any particular degree. So keep it short. It does need to be in the area of 20 slides. If it goes over by a few, it's not too important. If it goes under by a few, not too important. But you don't want it to be too short. Sometimes we just get submissions maybe 10 pages long. That's not long enough to do it justice. You should be able to populate it to around 20 slides. And then in terms of the individual pages and how it's set out, usually, as I say, this is a form of telling your story in a graphical way. So the best PowerPoints that we see may have anything between 1 and 4, say, pictures on any given slide. And some of them can be arranged in a way so that you might have 1 or 2 more photos. But we don't want it to be a collage. Because again, the jury is looking at this relatively short time frame, doesn't have the time to look at it as a sort of work of art. They just want to see the pictures that tell the story. So don't use too many photos. Secondly, don't use renderings. We don't want to see how an architect has conceived how a project should be deployed or seen by the jury. We want to see how it actually looks. And if you're showing us a rendering, then it's conceptual, it's not actual. Another issue that commonly arises is that the photos don't show people in them. And I think this is probably to do with the mentality of the design industry in general, where they like to show their work in its own context, which is pristine. You don't want to see anything that may distract from the design. But that's not the most important thing. As I mentioned before, there's not simply a design-driven competition. We want to see that the project is being used. And the only way to do that really is to show people who are in the context of the picture and people within the building that are using it, and to show that it has access to the community and all the rest. So please don't use photos that have no people. We don't want to just see the building. We want to see how it's being used and that it has, a dynamic quality. Another issue that we commonly come across is that people will use the photos within the PowerPoint to include the story in a textual form. We don't mind there being some text. If there's, say, a line of text or two that explains a particular picture, that is okay. But we don't want to see data on there. We don't want to see long explanations. The jury is not going to be reading these slides because remember, there is only going to be an opportunity for a minute at most for any given slide to appear. So they don't have that opportunity to read. If you have, and you will, a need for textual explanation, then that goes within the application form. And then the juror who is assigned to your project will be able to read and to educate himself or herself about your project, and then he or she will explain those details when they make the submission to the rest of the jury. So please don't use too much data or text within the pictures itself. This is conceived as a graphics driven way of telling your story. Finally, it's good here to show both the inside and the outside of the project. Again, this is set out within the jury, within the submission guidelines, but we want to see what it looks like from various aspects outside, and then also, of course, what it looks like inside. Of course, this depends upon what type of project it is, but if it's, say, an office, then we want to see what the different floors of the office look like. We want to see the common areas. We want to see the facilities, the different types of uses that are found within the building, all that sort of thing. Including, I suppose, the ESG aspects. We want to see if it has, upgraded facilities for environmental purposes, what they look like, what they consist of. So the full 9 yards, both inside and outside. And at that point, I think we can perhaps move on to our Q&A section, which would be next slide, please, Camille. And this is the point.
Colin, let me just add something on that
Sure.
on the previous slide. Just looking at it from as the jury does. Colin hit all the points correctly. But if I can just emphasize the need for a holistic submission, as we're looking for holistic projects, that your application is thorough. But at the same time, though, we're looking for the essence of why it's being submitted. And it is not a commercial pitch for the project. We are looking at it from the angle of attributes and to the extent of which, even in the PowerPoint presentation, we have received videos that are largely driven off of a commercial marketing and sales approach. That's not necessary. Matter of fact, it's a little bit distracting, and obviously the file size gets to be enormous. But if you do have something that will emphasize the points that are being brought out in the submission application, which is read thoroughly by each individual juror that's assigned to the project, and that you can see how that the project fulfills those particular things that you're trying to get across, which we'll discuss about the stabilized part of the project and what benefits it is actually driving in our Q&A here, I assume. But please don't overly populate that PowerPoint deck with things that don't contribute to what your initial submission point is about, and look at it holistically as the entire submission, not purely as a form and a PowerPoint and anything else. Thank you.
Yeah. It's true, and I think that the PowerPoint is, to an extent, a work of art. It's perhaps easier to say what it shouldn't be rather than what it should be. But a good PowerPoint certainly stands out, and it's probably fair to say that unless you have a good PowerPoint, really not likely to win an award. So it really is important in telling the story to the juror, in telling the entirety, as Dan just mentioned, holistically of what the project's about and what features it has that entitles it to be handed an award. So at this point, we'll move on to the Q&A section, and this, of course, is perhaps the most important part. Any questions that you, as a viewer, would like to ask me or Dan about how they may fill out the application form or how they should go about submitting their project, any advice that we can give, and please go ahead and put your questions in within the panel there, and we will get to them as we go along. Now, in the meantime, perhaps, well, actually, we do have a question that's come in straight away. It says, if one of the jury comes from our own organization, are we still eligible to apply for this award? And the answer is yes, certainly you can. And this is very common, in fact. That people put up their own projects for. In fact, it's the norm for people to put their own projects up for an award. I suppose that the one fillip to this is that if there's a member of the jury whose company or organization is applying for an award, in that case, it's still possible to do it, but that jury member would have to sit out any discussions when the jury comes to consider it. But certainly, it's quite possible for projects to be submitted by the company. Sorry, I misread the question there. It's certainly quite possible for projects to be submitted by the same company for whom the juror works.
Yeah, and we take that quite seriously, if I can emphasize. There's certain elements of declaration at the jury level about any interest that you have in a project. And it really does go down to even someone who may have been working on the project that is not the one who's submitting, or anybody associated with it that has some kind of relationship, if you will. I mean, not necessarily relationship as they know the project or know the developer or what have you. We're talking about relationship of actually working on the project or having something to do with the submission in some way.
Yeah. Okay, so well, Dan, why don't we talk between ourselves about a few of the issues that commonly come up with the jury. Stabilisation, you mentioned that just before.
Right.
There is a requirement in the application form that projects be stabilised financially and otherwise in order to be eligible. So, and this is something that I think has tripped up quite a few applicants in the past. So we might as well go over this now. Can you explain what that means?
Okay. Just very simply put, if it's a very fresh project having been completed, so all the projects must be complete, obviously. If it has not been able to get its grip, and I say that quite loosely, some of them can do it very quickly, but there are large scale projects that may not, that require a period of time before they are stabilized in a variety of different ways. Stabilized insofar as I've indicated that the contribution of the development to the city or to the environment in which it has been developed, or to the extent of which it's financially stable. Now, there is a little gray area here in terms of the financial stability, and it is the prerogative of the jury as a whole to interpret that. But we do place some emphasis on the fact that we want to see projects that are successful. And the reason for that is obviously we want to see them contribute for longer periods of time than just a short flash in the pan. Our exercise is attempting to award projects that will be longer term commitment to the benefits of the city or the environment in which it's been built. So we do like to see that the projects are stable and stabilized. They're making that contribution it was intended to, and the submission that has been made that may emphasize that point. It is very easy for a juror to be able to recognize that and promote that to the rest of the jury which will be making its decision on the back of the information that has been drawn from the jurors doing all the investigation in detail. Which leads us to another point, which I'm not sure is on your agenda there, Colin, but the actual there should be. Now, in some remote areas, it's very challenging for the jury, and particularly if they're in areas outside of the jurisdiction of a juror, that we will be going to look at the projects. This is quite important that after submissions, if they have been shortlisted, those projects will be reviewed by a committee member or a delegate nominee, someone that will be able to provide the physical feedback. It's not purely that we're doing this off of submission information that you're providing. We will kick the tires, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right, Dan. It's something I neglected to address in the way in which the jury considers these projects. So we have two jury meetings. The one which is I think end of March considers all of the submissions that are made in order to find out the winners. Sorry, the finalists, and then around 20 perhaps finalists are chosen, and at that point the jury will visit each one in turn. Before having a second jury meeting, which I think is end of April. And then the final roughly 10, 12 or so winners are selected. So it is necessary for the jury to visit physically the projects that make it to the finalist stage.
Right.
And then as Dan says, they'll go on and kick the tires.
The
Okay,
Q&A?
so we do have another question here. It says, for a project launching in phases, can we include renderings of the parts that are not launched? Dan, what do you think?
Renderings of the parts that are not launched.
Yes.
That would imply, based on what I just had mentioned, that the project is not fully complete and it would not necessarily be stabilized in promoting the parts, promoting the holistic submission points that you're trying to get across. It needs to
Right.
be complete.
But I think that there is
There could
a
be
rule
merits,
here.
though. Yeah, there could
Yeah.
be merits of the first phases.
Yeah.
But if you're saying it won't all come together until all the phases are done, then wait till all the phases are done. And I know this is challenging for developers because in some cases, some phases don't get kicked off. But it is imperative that we see that if you're submitting that one single phase and you say, oh, there's other things that we intend to do, we're not going to be judging on the other things you intend to do. We'll be looking at that, what you are submitting as having been built.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not uncommon that projects that are very complicated and large are delivered in phases, and that say any individual phase can be sort of complete in itself and will be eligible. So in that case, you don't want to discourage people from submitting partially completed entire projects if that phase is done. And then, you know, if you would want to give us an idea of how the entire thing might look, then, you know, I don't think we would have a problem in looking at what it might be. I wouldn't go into very much detail because Dan says it's not really relevant to that individual phase that has been completed. But to a limited extent, I think it could be relevant. Another issue here from a mixed-use development, it says, part of my project has been launched for a year, some recently and others pending. Do I still qualify?
The answer is for the first phase that is completed, it's a firm yes. And if it is successful in its own right, without necessarily having to have the other benefits of the mixed use combined, which would draw some questions to the committee to say to what extent it would be fully realizing its full potential without those balanced mixed uses. But again, we have seen this, that again, that it is explained, and perhaps maybe I was a bit too quick to say about the rendering side, but as far as what the attempt is, you can say that with confidence, but at the same time, we will still be looking at what has been completed and is stabilized to be able to determine whether or not it's an award, but has an award potential.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky question. I don't think that it's a one-size-fits-all question. And if you have any doubts about it, then the best way may be to drop me an email through the awards email that's on the website, and give me some more details about just how far the project has advanced, and then I can perhaps give you a more informed answer for your particular project. So the answer really is it depends, and on various features which are really difficult to generalize about. Okay, so let's see what other issues do we have. This is an issue which again we spoke about before, both Dan and I, in fact, and that is that the program is not primarily design driven. It has all kinds of other features that we want to look at in order to see whether or not it's arrived at that level of excellence that we require. But Dan, perhaps you can explain what other types of qualities a winning project is likely to have.
Hmm. Right. Uh, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but basically, if one is making an application, it would be good to know just the same as you would approach to any particular client or any particular award, the angle in which that we're looking at it from, and that is not purely, as Colin indicated, as a design award. The ULI principles are largely driven off of contributions to the community from a built environment standpoint. Now, that contribution is broad. It is not purely a built project that is just a design feature, albeit that one could argue in some cases some landmarks are absolutely fabulous as design pieces, but they will draw people. They encourage interaction. They find that it has added value to the community, and to the extent of which it is environmentally friendly and has other features that to support it, from something as is an example of what we want to be able to show to the rest of the membership as well as to the world at large. These awards are actually highly publicized. That we are looking at these projects as being something that is worth replicating, and it will be in terms of what certain features are, and that we would continue as ULI to push for these particular approaches towards designs and plans and built projects. We have seen this where the projects have been able to use community capital. So it's not purely on the back of a design or a plan or the built environment, but because the community has all come together to be able to build this particular project. And we find that some of those have extremely valuable lessons for the rest of the membership, and to the extent of which it has generated a greater, perhaps, contribution than even some of the most beautiful projects, if you will, or awards from looking at it from another angle. So if you will kindly look at over the ULI principles and to look at your submissions from the particular angle that will be more so as a contribution to the environment and to the community as probably your modus operandi. That does not exclude that there are a lot of other angles that you can take and certainly stimulate the interest of the jury. It is we've seen a variety of different projects that are uh, interesting, not necessarily just purely from an interest standpoint, but actually have been candidates, and we've looked at them further. Not to say that they were winners, but that we were surprised, and that's good. That's a really, really that's one of the reasons why I'm participating on this jury, is because it's a joy to be able to see projects that are really thinking outside the box, and what solutions are coming up that are relevant to again within the principles of the ULI.
Hmm. And of course, that can be, as a consequence of that, that can be helpful for other people who are looking to design projects of the same type, in that it's replicable and so on. And to what extent do you look at that as being important?
that's a the replicable side of it is relative. So if you're talking about huge projects, mixed use projects, and I mean perhaps CNTND may be an example. It's actually a very large project in a very large city. You know, the land was already owned, or the access to that land was already provided. So they're very complicated in terms of how this can be replicated by virtue of just the position. Similarly, AMP's project, that was AMP's land, and all they really were was a new solution that was going to draw more to that particular block, if you will. Their original building is right on the waterfront at the quay, but the back lot was approached from an angle that I don't think it's replicable insofar as what the principles are, but certainly that location is exclusive to what they could do. So you need to look at it from the side saying we can replicate these type of approaches towards projects, and this is what we're trying to endorse. So that even if it's big or small, we know that the principles, generally speaking, still apply.
Mm. How about some ESG issues? I know that in the last few years, ESG, and in particular the environment,
Mhm.
has become front and center with real estate. To what extent are they factors that the jury considers when looking to make an award?
Yeah. Um, Obviously, the whistles and bells should be pointed out if I can, and I don't mean to downgrade the parts of it, but the built environment is that there are at present certain finite limitations, but I'd say that whatever efforts are being done between solar panels, sun shading, uh, thermal glazing, ways in which vertical circulation is addressed, accommodation for uh, bikers and facilities to stimulate use of other sustainable ways to move into, get to, and move within the building. So much the better. We enjoy seeing that. What we want to do is see the performance. We like to see how the building performs. So that in some cases, it'll just take a while to be able to get a grip, if you will. But it will be taken into account that they just ordinarily that all those features will actually contribute to a lower energy building, and certainly something that I think again as a contribution to the environment, it will stand out as an example that one could do better in terms of how they're approaching it. And in the case of the AMP tower, it's a good example in terms of adaptive. Well, basically, I must admit, as far as the building is concerned, they tore down about two-thirds of it. It's the core that was really the fundamental part of it, but at least they did keep some principles and didn't take the entire building down. But you can tell it doesn't look anything like, and certainly there was a tremendous amount of new building in and around it. But if I can say ESG, now the environment is something that I think most developers, certainly consultants, are putting a tremendous amount of emphasis on. But getting over to the S side, that's the that's the one that, if I can, that we are also looking at with just equal amount of emphasis. And I've implied this in terms of looking at the contribution of the buildings to the environment. Now, S as well as E have a lot to do with management, and management is not. Is something we fully respect. This is not just a complete building and wipe your hands on it. It's an operated building. It's stabilized. It's working as it had been designed or intended in the brief, and what we look for is ways in which it is starting to perform. Similarly, on the E side, the performance of the building, if you could demonstrate that it has an environmental benefit as opposed to either the previous building or on a carbon emission or power consumption on a per square meter basis, by all means. Social side is something that we were really drawn to. So with equal emphasis of anything that what for management is doing, as I've indicated, from promoting biking or walking or vertical circulation brings people together, community areas, ways in which the building is perhaps 24 hours and utilized by the public. We had an example here in Singapore where there's a commercial mixed-use development in the Raffles Place area. It has a vertical park that drew people up. It's open practically it's about 18 hours a day. They do close it at the late at night. But at the same time, though, these type of elements to the building are what it stimulates the interest of the jury. On the governance side, I'd say the G end of it is a little bit outside our purview, but at the same time, one one may or may not be able to really address this. From a security standpoint, obviously, I think all buildings are being required to have certain elements of security systems. We don't place too much emphasis on that, but if it is if there is some type of merit, it's in a very difficult area, and you've been able to sort out some security aspects of it. By all means, you can provide that, but it would not necessarily be a number one as environment and the social side.
And I suppose it might help to establish that there's some innovation or technology that's been introduced, which could help.
Yeah, correct. Anything that is on the broadening our perspective in terms of how technology is improving, prop tech solutions that are applied and working and replicable, and similarly ones that are not just flash in the pan. Some things we've seen that have been applied. And if there is robots that are cleaning the floors, so much better, but that's not what we're looking for. If I can, the prop tech we would be looking for has a little bit more to do with the E side of the ESG.
Right. Okay, so I don't see any more questions that are coming from our audience, but if so, then please enter them now. If not, then Dan, is there anything else that we haven't discussed so far that springs to mind from your point of view?
Well, I just would emphasize that people do take the time to understand what it is that ULI's purpose is about these awards when we're trying to flag. And secondly, that your submission is holistic, that you don't just emphasize something in the submission documentation and you leave out your PowerPoint, probably put more emphasis on the PowerPoint. Don't look at it from a commercial angle too much. Don't look at it from a design angle too much. To look at it holistically and try and demonstrate those types of merits that would warrant a global award, not just perhaps at our level. We're just the one on the we're trying to establish this as Asian solutions. And believe me, I personally, out of the projects that have been submitted, I think some of them have been global winners. The global committee didn't think so, but at the same time, though, there is the possibility that you can receive a global award. And so keep a view on the big picture is to go right to the top if I can. And then, frankly, I think it's just kind of thinking bigger and outside the box.
Okay, so thanks very much, Dan. I don't see any more questions in the lineup. So if anyone does have questions that's are not raised right now, then please just drop me a line, as I say, through the email address on our awards website, and I will be happy to address those as they come in. In the meantime, we have until, let's see, the 8th of March until submissions close. So there's still plenty of time to get them in, although I would warn people that the application form is quite extensive, and so it takes a bit of time for all of the different components of that to be put together. So please don't leave it until absolutely the last minute, although it seems to me that it happens every year that we get an avalanche of submissions at the very point of the deadline. That's simply the way these things work. But anyway, 8th of March is the deadline. Please ask me any questions if you need to, and we'll wrap it up there. Dan, thanks very much for your contributions. Thanks very much, Kenil, for putting this together for us, and thanks everyone for attending today.